King Torrhen Stark, also known as the King Who Kneeled, was a head of House Stark who reigned as king in the north when Aegon the First Targaryen invaded Westeros with his dragons and started the War of Conquest. Unlike every other king in Westeros, the king in the north refused to fight Aegon, but instead kneeled before him, prioritizing his people over his ego. He was the last king in the north, until the secession of the North and the Riverlands in the War of the Five Kings, and the coronation of Robb Stark. House Stark ruled as kings in the North, stretching back into the mists of time, before written history began 6,000 years ago, when the Andals invaded all of southern Westeros. When the Andals arrived, the Stark kings in the North were already ruling at Winterfell. According to legend, the first king in the North was Brandon Stark, better known as Bran the Builder, who lived 8,000 years ago. According to legends, he led the forces of the North in the War for the Dawn against the White Walkers, and built the wall to guard against their return, and also began construction of Winterfell. The kings in the North were successfully able to fend off the Andals from invading, holding the line of the neck at the choke point of Moat Cailin. As a result, the North remained the only independent kingdom of the First Men. The North would be independent kingdom until Aegon the Conqueror comes with his sisters and their dragons, and the unfortunate Stark king who would rule the North at this time happened to be Torrhen Stark. Let's tell the tale of the King Who Kneeled. After the Riverlands and Storm's End had fallen under the control of Aegon the Conqueror, Torrhen Stark called his banners. He was aware that due to the vast distance of the North, it would take a long time to assemble his army. After the Field of Fire, which was the pivotal battle that decided the result of the War of Conquest, in which Kings Mern Gardener of the Reach and Lorne Lannister of the Rock faced the invading Aegon the Conqueror on the open field. The two kings combined the armies of both the richest kingdom and the most populous kingdom, terming it the Iron Fist. Their total force numbered 60,000 men. In contrast, Aegon's army was outnumbered by 5 to 1. The battle was fought on a wide field in the Reach. However, Aegon the Conqueror unleashed his 3 dragons against the enemy army. 4,000 men burned alive that day, including King Mern himself. King Loren instead bent the knee to the Targaryen warlord. He was thus appointed Lord Paramount of the Westerlands and Warden of the West. With the death of King Mern, House Gardener, which had ruled the Reach since the time of the First Men, became extinct. House Tyrell, the hereditary stewards of the Gardeners, then surrendered Highgarden to Aegon. In return, Aegon raised Harlan Tyrell, the head of the family, to Lord Paramount of the Reach and Warden of the South. While at Highgarden, Aegon the First learned that Torrhen had crossed the neck and entered the Riverlands, leading an army of 30,000 men. Torrhen amassed his army and marched to meet the Targaryen warlord. Aegon the First abandoned his plans to march south, and at once started his way north, racing ahead of his army on Balerion. Both Rhaenys and Visenya Targaryen, as well as all the lords who had bent the knee to Aegon after Harrenhal and the Field of Fire, were sent word of this movement. So when Torrhen reached the banks of the Trident, he found a host of 45,000 men and 3 dragons waiting for him. After seeing Aegon's dragons and his massive host, Torrhen realized the war was already lost. Even without dragons, Torrhen Stark and his Northerners were outnumbered, but there was no doubt he would give a good fight against those odds. But when he saw 3 dragons of Aegon the Conqueror, he spent the entire night with his generals thinking of what his next and perhaps his final move as the king in the north should be. Torrhen's scouts had reported seeing the ruins of Harrenhal, and Torrhen had heard accounts of the Field of Fire as well. Some of his lords urged him to attack, but he realized that a similar fate would await him if he tried to force a crossing. Others of his lords urged the king of the north to fall back to Moat Cailin to make his stand there. Torrhen's bastard half-brother Brandon Snow offered to cross the Trident at dark to kill the dragons. At the end, Torrhen did send his half-brother Brandon Snow to Aegon's camp, but not to kill Aegon's dragons, but to treat with Aegon. The whole night messages went back and forth, and the next morning Torrhen crossed the Trident, where he kneeled and laid his crown at the feet of Aegon the First Targaryen, and swore fealty. In exchange for his life and the lives of the Northmen, Torrhen Stark swore fealty to House Targaryen. Instead of fighting, he chose to bend the knee and surrendered his crown. In return for Torrhen's submission, Aegon allowed House Stark to continue ruling the North as they had for thousands of years, but as vassals of the Iron Throne. They held the titles of Lord Paramount of the North, Lord of Winterfell, and Warden of the North. The Starks thus retained their ancient positions and traditions. Ever since Torrhen is known as the King who kneeled. It's unknown what Aegon did with Torrhen's crown. The Inn of the Kneeling Man later arose where Torrhen had bent the knee. After Torrhen's surrender, the Company of the Rose, a sellsword company, was formed by men and, according to some accounts, women from the north, who refused to bend the knee to Aegon the First Targaryen. These men and women willingly chose exile across the narrow sea. Torrhen's sons did not agree with the Targaryen rule. Some of them spoke of rebelling and raising the Stark banner. Whether Torrhen gave his consent or not is unknown. No rebellions by House Stark are known thus far. Lord Torrhen's daughter was married to Rhaenyra Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie. This marriage had been arranged by Queen Rhaenys Targaryen as an attempt to knit the new realm together. There are letters at the Citadel which suggest that Lord Stark only agreed to this match after much protest, and that his sons had refused to attend the wedding. Lord Rhaenyra would be killed early in the reign of King Aenys the First Targaryen by his own brother Jonas. It's unknown whether Torrhen's daughter was still alive at this point. Torrhen was entombed in the crypts of Winterfell after his death. 3 centuries later, Torrhen's descendant Ned Stark was amongst the rebel lords against Aegon the Conqueror's descendant Aerys the Mad King during Robert's Rebellion, in which the Targaryen dynasty was deposed, and Robert crowned as the new king. Although some Northerners sneer at Torrhen as the king who kneeled, his descendants, the Starks, argued that Torrhen saved thousands of lives that day, and that his critics forget that they are alive today because of him. King Torrhen is mentioned a few times in Game of Thrones for kneeling down to Aegon and his dragons. The most significant mention of the king who kneeled was in Season 7. When Jon Snow appears before Daenerys Targaryen on Dragonstone, the latter scoffs when Sir Davos Seavord presents Jon as the king in the north, and declares that the last person who held that title was Torrhen Stark, who bent the knee to her ancestor Aegon the Conqueror, using Torrhen's declaration of loyalty in perpetuity to try and persuade Jon into confirming the North's fealty to House Targaryen, and abandoning the King in the North title. King in the North, feminine equivalent being Queen in the North, is a title given to the ruler of the North during its time as an independent kingdom, before and after the coming of the Targaryens. A title also used for the rulers of the North was Kings of Winter. During the opening stages of the War of the Five Kings, Lord Robb Stark was proclaimed as the new king in the north by his bannerman, the first in 300 years after Torrhen Stark. The Kingdom of the North came to a temporary end after the Red Wedding when Roose Bolton, who conspired with House Frey and House Lannister, initiated a massacre of the Northern army and personally stabbed Robb Stark through the heart. However, the Kingdom of the North was re-established after a short few years under the Bolton rule, when the Starks led by Jon Snow and Sansa Stark later gathered an army of northern houses, still loyal to House Stark the Free Folk and the Knights of the Vale, and retook Winterfell from the Boltons. With the Boltons defeated, Jon Snow was proclaimed the new king in the north, reasserting the North's independence from the Iron Throne. The Kingdom of the North came to a temporary end once again, when Jon bent the knee to Queen Daenerys Targaryen in order to gain her full support in the Great War. Like Torrhen Stark, Jon Snow bent the knee to save his people. After the death of Daenerys Targaryen, Sansa Stark declared independence from the Iron Throne, and herself the Queen in the North, and thus the Kingdom in the North was re-established once again. Her brother Bran Stark became the ruler of the Six Kingdoms. 300 years after, Torrhen Stark kneeled to Aegon Targaryen. Now Aegon's descendant Jon Snow, whose real name is Aegon, kneeled down to Torrhen's descendant Bran. All of this is part of the Targaryen history, and the upcoming Game of Thrones prequel House of the Dragon is based on the Targaryen history. We are bound for an epic journey starting in 2022, which is when the first episode of the Game of Thrones prequel airs. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.